Hashtag Part 1. The rain on Kepler 442b fell in sheets of silver mercury, each drop containing trace elements that would kill most carbon-based life forms within minutes. Sarah Chun pulled her environmental suit's hood tighter, watching the droplets slide harmlessly off the human-engineered fabric as she navigated through the Zelethi refugee camp. The irony wasn't lost on her. Humans, once considered the galaxy's most fragile species, now walked freely where others required full containment. She'd been on the planet for 3 months now, part of the Human Engineering Corps' disaster response team. The Zelethi evacuation had been catastrophic. When their homeworld's core destabilized, over 12 billion souls had fled in whatever vessels they could commandeer. Many didn't make it. Those who did found themselves scattered across border worlds like Kepler 442b, planets barely suitable for temporary habitation, let alone permanent settlement. Sarah's boots squelched through the metallic mud as she made her way between the temporary shelters. Each structure bore the utilitarian stamp of emergency construction, functional, not comfortable. The Zelethi refugees within huddled together, their chitinous exteriors clicking softly in their species' expression of communal distress. She'd learned to interpret the sounds over the past weeks. Rapid clicking meant fear, slow rhythmic patterns indicated grief, and silence was the worst. Engineer Chun, a voice called out in accented galactic standard. Sarah turned to see Coordinator Vexa approaching, his forelegs moving in a careful pattern that indicated respectful greeting among his people. The Zelethi stood nearly 3 meters tall, their insectoid forms covered in natural armor that shifted color with emotion. Currently, Vexa's shell displayed the deep purple of exhaustion mixed with streaks of orange concern. Coordinator, Sarah nodded, matching his formal tone. I brought the supplies you requested. The water purification units should handle the mercury content, and the protein synthesizers are calibrated for Zelethi biochemistry. Your efficiency is appreciated, Vexa managed, though Sarah could hear the strain in his harmonics. Pride was hard for the Zelethi. Their species had once been the galaxy's premier engineers, their crystalline cities considered architectural marvels. Now, they were refugees dependent on human charity. There is another matter. Sarah waited. She'd learned patience was crucial when dealing with traumatized populations. Rush them, and they'd retreat into their shells, literally in the Zelethi's case. It is Kixla, Vexa finally said, his antenna drooping. She is young. Only 7 cycles. During the evacuation, there was an accident. The loading bay doors. He trailed off, but Sarah could fill in the blanks. Emergency evacuations were chaos incarnate, and children always paid the highest price. Where is she? Vexa led her through the camp to a smaller shelter set apart from the others. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of Zelethi distress pheromones, bitter almonds mixed with ozone. In the corner, on a makeshift bed of thermal blankets, lay a small figure. Sarah's breath caught. Kixla was tiny by Zelethi standards, her shell still the soft green of youth rather than the hardened brown of adulthood. She would have been beautiful, with delicate wing structures just beginning to emerge from her thorax and antennae that curved gracefully like earth ferns. Would have been, if not for the traumatic amputation where her left rear leg should have been. The wound had been treated. Sarah could see the bio-sealed gel coating the stump, but Zelethi physiology didn't regenerate limbs like some species. For a race that prized physical perfection and whose movement patterns were integral to their communication, the loss was catastrophic. No wonder she'd been isolated. In Zelethi culture, the disabled were often hidden away, considered broken. Hello, Kixla, Sarah said softly in Zelethi, the clicking consonants still awkward on her human tongue. The child's compound eyes, each facet a miniature rainbow, turned toward her with a mixture of curiosity and fear. You speak Zelethi, a new voice said. Sarah turned to see another refugee entering the shelter, an elderly female whose shell bore the intricate etchings of a teacher or storyteller. Iamrixma, Kixlese, Guardian. Her parents did not survive the evacuation. The words were delivered with the flat effect of someone who'd repeated them too many times. Sarah noticed how Rixma positioned herself between Sarah and the child, protective, despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her form. I learned your language because I believe understanding starts with communication, Sarah replied, still in zealothy. She slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the floor, making herself less imposing. I'm here to help with the supply distribution, but I'd like to know more about Kixlaw's situation. What is there to know? Rixma's tone carried bitter resonance. She is broken. In the old world, there would have been prosthetics, regeneration therapy, perhaps even clonal grafting. Here, she gestured at the shelter's thin walls. Here we have survival, nothing more. Sarah studied the child, who hadn't made a sound since she'd entered. Zealoty young were typically vibrant, their shells shifting through rapid color changes as they learned to control their chromatic expressions. Kixlaw's shell remained a dull, unchanging gray, the color of despair. On Earth, Sarah said carefully, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We've had to learn to make do with less, to create solutions from whatever we could find. May I examine her injury? I'm not a medical doctor, but I am an engineer. Rixma's antenna twitched, surprise mixed with suspicion. Among the galactic species, humans were known for many things, but medical expertise wasn't typically one of them. Their biology was too different, too fragile by most standards. Why would a human engineer want to examine a zealothy medical issue? It was Kixlaw who responded, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the musical quality unique to young zealothy. You want to help me? The question broke Sarah's heart. How many had looked at this child and seen only damage, disability, something to be hidden away? She moved closer slowly, telegraphing her movements. I'd like to try. Would that be okay? Kixlaw's good legs shifted, and she managed a small nod. Sarah activated her suit's medical scanner, a piece of human tech that had surprised the galaxy with its adaptability to alien physiologies. The holographic display showed the extent of the damage. The leg had been severed cleanly at the second joint, likely by an emergency bulkhead. The healing was progressing well, but, as expected, there was no sign of regeneration. The cut is clean, Sarah observed, switching back to galactic standard for technical terms. That's actually good news. It means... She paused, pulling up her tablet and beginning to sketch. Her stylus flew across the surface, creating technical diagrams with practiced ease. What are you doing? Rixma asked, peering over her shoulder. Designing, Sarah replied absently, lost in the engineering challenge. The zealothy skeletal system is actually remarkably similar to Earth arthropods, but with some fascinating adaptations. The joint structure here, she highlighted a section of her sketch, is essentially a ball-end socket design, but with these additional contact points for stability. If I could replicate that with carbon fiber and titanium alloy. She looked up to find both Rixma and Vexos staring at her. Even Kixlaw had propped herself up to see better, a faint tinge of purple, curiosity, creeping into her gray shell. You want to build her a new leg? Vexos' voice carried disbelief. But human technology is, forgive me, but it is considered primitive by galactic standards. Your species has only been spacefaring for 60 years. Sarah smiled, the expression that many species found unsettling, but which humans use to convey warmth. We may be new to space, but we've been solving problems for a lot longer than that. And sometimes primitive is exactly what you need. She turned back to Kixlaw. I can't promise anything, but I'd like to try. It won't be like your original leg. I don't have access to zealothy bioengineering facilities, but I might be able to make something that works. Would you be willing to let me try? The child's compound eyes reflected Sarah's face in thousands of tiny images. For a long moment, the shelter was silent except for the sound of mercury rain on the roof. Then, so quietly Sarah almost missed it, Kixlaw's shell shifted. Just a touch, just the faintest hint, but there was blue, the color of hope. Yes, Kixlaw whispered. Sarah spent the next 3 hours taking detail measurements and scans. She documented every angle of Kixlaw's remaining legs, studied her movement patterns, analyzed weight distribution, and gait mechanics. The child, initially shy, gradually became more engaged, asking questions about the scanning equipment and even suggesting positions that might help Sarah get better readings. You're very smart, Sarah told her, and was rewarded with another flash of blue across the child's shell. She was first in her learning pod, Rixma said quietly. Before, The sentence didn't need finishing. As the day wore on, word spread through the camp. Other Zealothi began to gather outside the shelter, their clicking conversations creating a constant background hum. Some are curious, others skeptical. Sarah heard fragments of conversation. Humans can't even regrow their own limbs. Their technology still uses combustion engines. They think digital computers are advanced. But there were other voices too, quieter ones. They survived without shells, someone whispered. They reached space with chemical rockets. And from an elder, his shell scarred with age, they adapt. Always they adapt. When Sarah finally emerged from the shelter, tablet clutched her chest, and, mind racing with possibilities, she found a crowd waiting. The sea of compound eyes should have been intimidating, but Sarah had learned to read Zealothi emotions. Among the doubt and skepticism, she saw something else, the faint blue tinge of hope, spreading like ripples through still water. I'll need materials, she announced, switching to clear galactic standard. Some I can salvage from damaged equipment. Others I'll have to fabricate. It will take time, probably several weeks. And I'll need help. I can design the prosthetic, but I'll need Zealothi expertise on neural interfaces and movement mechanics. You truly believe you can do this? The question came from a Zealothi she didn't recognize, his shell bearing the deep marks of a veteran engineer. Build a functional prosthetic with human technology? Sarah thought about her answer carefully. False confidence wouldn't serve anyone, but neither would doubt. I believe I can build something that will allow Kixla to walk. It won't be perfect. I'm working with limited resources and bridging two very different technological philosophies. But humans have a long history of prosthetics. We've been replacing lost limbs for thousands of years, starting with carved wood and leather, moving through metal and plastics, and now into neural-responsive materials. We may not have your bioengineering capabilities, but we know mechanics. She paused, meeting as many of those compound eyes as she could. More than that, we know about adaptation. We've had to. Every human advancement came from necessity, from finding ways to overcome our limitations. We couldn't fly, so we built wings. We couldn't breathe underwater, so we made diving equipment. We couldn't survive in space, so we created suits and ships. And when we lose limbs, we build new ones. The crowd fell silent. Then, the veteran engineer stepped forward, his damaged shell catching the light. I am Zexville, formerly of the 3rd Engineering Caste. I designed adaptive systems for colonial environments. I will help. Another stepped forward. Yixna, Neural Interface Specialist. Then another. Bexlo, Materials Engineer. One by one, Zealothi engineers identified themselves, offering their expertise. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. These people had lost everything. Their homes, their world, their technological superiority. Yet here they were, willing to work with a human on a project that many would consider impossible. Thank you, she managed. We'll start tomorrow. Shelter 43 should have enough space for a workshop. As the crowd dispersed, Vexar remained. His shell had shifted to a complex pattern Sarah hadn't seen before. Purple exhaustion mixed with orange concern, but shot through with veins of that precious blue hope. Why? He asked simply. Sarah looked back at the shelter where Kixla waited. Because she deserves better than survival. Because every child deserves to run and play and dance. Because she paused, thinking of humanity's long, painful history. Because we know what it's like to be considered less than. To be told you're too primitive, too fragile, too limited. And we know the only answer to that is to prove them wrong, one impossible thing at a time. Vexas studied her for a long moment. Then, in a gesture Sarah had only seen between close family members, he briefly touched his antenna to her gloved hand. You honor us, Sarah-chun. May the stars witness your work. That night, Sarah sat in her own shelter, surrounded by technical manuals and design specifications. The mercury rain had stopped, leaving the camp in an eerie silence broken only by distant clicking conversations. She pulled up her communication terminal and began composing a message to Earth, to the Engineering Corps headquarters. Request for materials and consultation, she typed. Project designation, Hope. Subject, pediatric prosthetic for Zealothi physiology. Note, this has become more than a single case. The entire refugee community is watching. Success here could change perceptions about human capability and compassion. Failure is not an option. She attached her preliminary designs and hit send, knowing it would take days for the message to reach Earth through the relay stations. In the meantime, she had work to do. Outside her shelter, she could hear the Zealothy engineers already gathering, their cliques and harmonics discussing possibilities, arguing over approaches, solving problems. For the first time since the evacuation, they sounded alive. They sounded like engineers. Sarah smiled and pulled up her design program. Tomorrow, they would begin building. Tonight, she would refine her plans. Because somewhere in this camp, a little girl with gray shells and compound eyes was waiting for a miracle. And Sarah Chun, human engineer from a primitive species, intended to deliver one. Part 2, the makeshift workshop in Shelter 43 looked like a collision between two different technological philosophies. Zealothy bioorganic equipment salvaged from the evacuation ships sat beside human mechanical tools, creating an odd harmony of crystalline interfaces and metal workbenches. Sarah stood at the center of organized chaos, her hands covered in synthetic lubricant as she carefully calibrated a servo motor no bigger than her thumb. 2 weeks had passed since she'd made her promise to Kixla. 2 weeks of 18-hour days, of failures and breakthroughs, of learning to merge human engineering principles with Zealothy biological systems. The team of volunteer engineers had grown from a handful to nearly 30, each bringing their expertise and, more importantly, their determination. The neural interface is still showing feedback loops, Yixna announced, her 4 arms manipulating holographic displays with practiced ease. The Zealothy neural specialist had initially been the most skeptical of the human approach, but she'd become one of Sarah's strongest advocates after witnessing the elegant simplicity of binary coding applied to biological systems. Your digital processors are struggling to interpret the analog signals from Zealothy neurons. Sarah wiped her forehead, leaving a streak of oil across her skin. What if we don't try to interpret them directly? What if we create a learning algorithm instead? Let the prosthetic observe and adapt to Kixla's neural patterns over time. Machine learning? Zexville looked up from where he was testing stress patterns on the carbon fiber segments. That's considered obsolete technology by galactic standards. Most species abandoned it centuries ago in favor of quantum consciousness interfaces. Obsolete doesn't mean ineffective, Sarah countered, pulling up her code on the main display. Human children learn to walk by falling down thousands of times. Our brains build neural pathways through repetition and adjustment. If we can replicate that process. She began coding in real time, her fingers flying across the haptic keyboard. The other engineers gathered around, watching lines of seemingly simple code accumulate into something more complex. Where Zealothy programming was elegant and evolved, human code was blunt and adaptable, full of redundancies and fail-safes. Look at this section. Sarah highlighted a portion of the algorithm. Instead of trying to perfectly map Zealothy neural signals from the start, we let the prosthetic learn. Every time Kixla tries to move, the system records the neural pattern and the intended result. Over time, it builds a personalized movement library. Bexlow, the materials engineer, made a sound of understanding, a low harmonic hum that resonated through his chest plates. It's crude, but it might actually work. The prosthetic becomes smarter the more it's used. Exactly. Sarah turned back to the physical components spread across her workbench. The prosthetic leg was taking shape, a fusion of human industrial design and Zealothy aesthetics. The core structure was titanium alloy, not as advanced as Zealothy biometal, but incredibly durable and lightweight. Carbon fiber sections provided flexibility where needed, while microservos controlled by the learning algorithm would handle fine motor control. But it was the exterior that showed the true collaboration. Zealothy engineers had helped design panels that could shift color like their natural shells, allowing Kixla to express emotions through her prosthetic just as she would through her biological limbs. It wasn't just functional, it was part of her. A commotion outside the shelter drew Sarah's attention. Through the transparent section of the shelter wall, she could see a crowd gathering. At its center was Administrator Thexnil, the Galactic Council's representative overseeing the refugee camp. The crystalline beings form refracted light in patterns that indicated severe displeasure. "Here we go," Sarah muttered, setting down her tools. She'd been expecting this. Administrator Thex Nil entered the workshop like a small avalanche, their crystalline body chiming with each movement. Behind them followed several other council species, a void touch whose form seemed to absorb light, a binary whose dual consciousness flickered between states, and a phantasm whose partially phased existence made them difficult to focus on. Engineer Chun. Thexnil's voice resonated through multiple harmonics, a trait of their species that made every statement sound like a pronouncement. "We have received concerning reports about unauthorized technology development in this facility." Sarah straightened, acutely aware of the oil stains on her uniform and the very human sweat on her brow. Beside her, the Zealoty engineers shifted nervously. Challenging the Galactic Council was not something refugees could afford to do. "Administrator," Sarah nodded respectfully, "all our work here falls within the humanitarian aid provisions outlined in Section 7 of the Refugee Protection Protocols. We're developing medical assistance technology for an injured child." With primitive human technology, the void touched interjected, their words seeming to emerge from nowhere and everywhere at once. "The Council has strict regulations about technological interference in refugee populations. The introduction of inferior systems could impede their eventual integration with proper galactic standard equipment." Sarah felt her jaw clench, but kept her voice level. "With respect, the proper galactic standard equipment isn't here. Kixlaw needs help now, not in some hypothetical future when advanced prosthetics might become available. The child's condition, while unfortunate, does not justify the risk," Thexnil continued. "Human technology is notorious for its unpredictability. Your species still uses combustion reactions for energy, physical circuits for computation, and mechanical systems for movement. The potential for catastrophic failure is minimal," Sarah interrupted, knowing she was breaking protocol, but unable to stop herself. "Every component has been tested and retested. We've built in multiple redundancies. And, more importantly, we've involved the Zealoty engineering community every step of the way. This isn't just human technology being imposed. It's a collaborative effort." The binary's consciousness flickered rapidly between states, processing probabilities. Statistical analysis indicates a 67.3% chance of initial failure, rising to 89.7% probability of critical malfunction within one standard cycle. "Your statistics are based on pure human technology." Zexville stepped forward, his damaged shell lending him an air of authority. "What we're creating here is hybrid, human adaptability merged with zealothy precision. Your models cannot account for innovation." The word innovation caused a ripple of reaction through the council representatives. In the galactic community, innovation was something that happened slowly, carefully, through approved channels and extensive testing. Humans, with their mere 60 years of spaceflight, were not supposed to innovate. They were supposed to learn to slowly adopt galactic standards to eventually, perhaps in a few centuries, contribute minor improvements to existing systems. "Show them," Sarah said quietly to her team. "Show them what we've accomplished." Yixna activated the holographic display, revealing the full schematic of the prosthetic. As the image rotated slowly, she began explaining the neural interface, how human binary code had been adapted to create bridges between digital and biological systems. Bexlow demonstrated the material composites, explaining how human manufacturing techniques allowed for customization impossible with standardized galactic fabricators. But it was Sarah who delivered the crucial point. She pulled up video footage from their tests, not with the prosthetic, which wasn't quite ready, but with the principles they developed. A zealothy volunteer with a damaged antenna, using a human-designed interface to control a mechanical appendage. The movement was crude compared to biological function, but it was movement where there had been none. "This is what human technology does," Sarah said, passion creeping into her voice. "We don't have quantum processors or bioorganic circuits, or any of the advanced systems the rest of the galaxy takes for granted. What we have is the ability to take whatever's available and make it work. We've been doing it for thousands of years, turning rocks into tools, fire into power, mathematics into computers. We may be primitive by your standards, but we get results." The phantasm drifted closer to the prosthetic prototype, their partially phased form allowing them to examine it from angles impossible for corporeal beings. The design is unorthodox. These manual adjustment points, these physical feedback systems, no advanced species would create such things. Because advanced species have never needed to, Sarah replied. When you have biofabricators that can grow perfect replacements, why would you need manual adjustments? When you have quantum consciousness transfers, why would you need learning algorithms? But when you have neither, when you have a child who needs help and limited resources to provide it, you innovate. Administrator Thexnil chimed thoughtfully, their crystalline form shifting through spectrums of consideration. You are asking us to approve a medical device based on principles the galaxy abandoned millennia ago. The liability alone. Then, don't approve it, Sarah said suddenly, the words surprising everyone, including herself. This isn't about council approval or galactic standards or technological hierarchies. This is about a 7-year-old girl who wants to walk again. If you want to file reports and cite regulations, go ahead. But unless you're prepared to provide a better solution, right here, right now, then get out of our way and let us work. The silence that followed was profound. In the galactic community, no one spoke to council representatives like that. Certainly not humans, the newest and most junior members of the interstellar community. Sarah could feel the Zealothy engineers holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable consequences. It was the binary who broke the silence, both consciousness aspects speaking in unison, a rare occurrence that indicated absolute certainty. Probability of success has been recalculated. New estimate, 12.4%. That's worse, the void touched observed. No, the binary continued. Previous calculations were based on technological success only. New calculation includes variable, human determination. Historical analysis shows humans accomplish statistically impossible feats when motivated by individual suffering. Recommend non-interference. Thexnil's form cycled through several rapid color changes before settling on a deep amber of reluctant acceptance. The Council will not officially approve this experiment. However, we will also not actively prevent it. Any consequences, positive or negative, will be the sole responsibility of those involved. Is that understood? Understood, Sarah replied firmly. The Council representatives filed out, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension and possibility. As soon as they were gone, the workshop erupted in a mixture of relief and excitement. Zealothy engineers clicked and hummed in their species equivalent of nervous laughter. You realize what you just did? Vexa had entered during the confrontation and now approached Sarah with something like awe in his compound eyes. You challenged the Galactic Council. For us. For Kixlaw. I stated facts, Sarah said, but her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her tools again. Now we need to make sure those facts include success. How's Kixlaw doing? Eager. Rixma's voice came from the entrance. The elderly Zealothy was guiding Kixlaw into the workshop, the child moving carefully on her 3 remaining legs. She insisted on coming to see the progress. Kixlaw's shell had lost much of its gray despair over the past 2 weeks. Colors flickered across her surface. Purple curiosity, orange excitement, and, yes, that precious blue hope. Her compound eyes took in the workshop with wonder, lingering on the prosthetic prototype. Is that for me? She asked in her musical voice. Sarah knelt down to the child's level. It will be, but it's not ready yet. We need to run more tests, make adjustments. And when it is ready, learning to use it will be hard work. It won't be like your original leg. You'll have to teach it how to move, and it will have to learn how you think. Are you ready for that? Kixlaw's antennae quivered with determination. I want to run again. I want to dance the joy patterns with my pod siblings when we find a new home. I'll work as hard as I need to. Then, we better get back to work, Sarah smiled, standing up. Yixna, can you run another simulation on the neural interface? I want to try reducing the feedback delay. Zexville, let's stress test the joint mechanisms one more time. And, Bexlow, I had an idea about the surface texture that might help with sensory feedback. The workshop returned to its controlled chaos, but now with an added element. Kixlaw settled into a corner where she could watch everything, her shell shifting through colors of fascination as the engineers worked. Occasionally, she would ask questions, smart questions that revealed a sharp mind eager to understand. Why does the metal bend here, but not here? She asked Zexville, who patiently explained material stress and flexibility. How does the computer know what I'm thinking? She queried Yixna, leading to a simplified but engaging discussion of neural signals. And to Sarah, why are you helping me? Sarah paused in her calibrations, considering her answer. On Earth, we have a concept called Ubuntu. It means I am because we are. We believe that humanity, being human, means recognizing that we're all connected. When you hurt, we hurt. When you heal, we heal. It doesn't matter that you're zealothy and I'm human. What matters is that you need help, and I can provide it. But the council said human technology is primitive. Kixlaw pointed out with the brutal honesty of youth. It is, Sarah agreed, by their standards, but primitive doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. And sometimes, she smiled, thinking of humanity's long history of beating the odds. Sometimes being primitive means you have to try harder, think differently, and never give up. That's what humans do best. As the day wore on, word of the confrontation with the council spread through the refugee camp. More zealothy came to the workshop, some to offer help, others simply to witness what was happening. They spoke in hushed tones about the human who had stood up to Administrator Thexnil, about the impossible project that might just work. The mercury rain began again as evening approached, drumming against the shelter's roof in its deadly rhythm. But inside the workshop, a different rhythm was taking shape, the rhythm of creation, of determination, of hope being forged from metal and code and sheer human stubbornness. Sarah worked through the night, as she had every night for 2 weeks. But now she wasn't alone. The workshop remained full of volunteers, zealothy and human alike, each contributing their skills to the project. Someone brought food, nutrient paste for the humans, synthesized proteins for the zealothy. Someone else rigged up a better lighting system. A young zealothy engineer started a rotation schedule so people could rest without stopping progress. It wasn't just about building a prosthetic anymore. It had become something larger, a statement about what could be accomplished when species worked together, when conventional wisdom was challenged, when compassion outweighed regulations. 3 days later, the prosthetic was ready for its first real test. Sarah held the device carefully, examining every component one final time. It wasn't beautiful by galactic standards. The design was too industrial, too mechanical. But it was functional, and more importantly, it was possible. Are you ready? She asked Kixlaw, who had been measured, scanned, and fitted so many times she could probably build a prosthetic herself by now. The child's shell blazed bright blue. Hope so intense it was almost painful to see. I'm ready. The attachment process was delicate. The neural interface needed to be calibrated precisely to Kixlaw's specific patterns. Sarah worked with Yixna to position the sensors while Zexville monitored the mechanical systems. The entire workshop held its breath as the connections were made, one by one. Try thinking about moving your leg, Sarah instructed softly. Don't force it. Just think about the movement like you normally would. For a long moment, nothing happened. The prosthetic remained still, its servos silent. Sarah could feel the doubt creeping in. What if the council was right? What if human technology simply wasn't advanced enough? What if the prosthetic twitched? It was tiny, barely noticeable, but the sensors caught it. A spike of neural activity translated into mechanical movement. The learning algorithm recorded its first successful pattern. I felt it, Kixlaw exclaimed, her shell flashing through a rainbow of emotions. I thought about moving, and it heard me. That's just the beginning, Sarah warned, but she was grinning. Remember, it needs to learn. Every movement you attempt teaches it more. It's going to be frustrating at first, but I don't care, Kixlaw interrupted. It moved. My leg moved. She looked up at the assembled engineers, her compound eyes bright with unshed tears, a zealothy expression of profound emotion. Thank you. Thank you all. The workshop erupted in celebration. Engineers who had been maintaining professional composure broke into their species' various expressions of joy. Clicks and harmonics filled the air as zealothy celebrated in their traditional patterns. Even the normally stoic Zexville allowed his shell to show bright streaks of satisfaction. But Sarah knew this was just the first step. The prosthetic had responded to neural input, but teaching it to walk would take weeks of practice. Learning to run might take months. Dancing? Well, that would be the real test. Don't celebrate too much yet, she called out, though she was smiling. We've got a long way to go. Kixla needs to build neural pathways, strengthen the connections. The prosthetic needs to learn her specific patterns. There will be setbacks, failures, but there will be progress, Vexai interrupted. For the first time since the evacuation, we have progress. He turned to address the gathered crowd. What we've witnessed here isn't just about one child or one prosthetic. It's about what's possible when we stop accepting limitations, when we dare to try the impossible. Over the following days, the workshop became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Zealothi from across the camp came to watch Kixla's sessions, to see human and Zealothi technology working in harmony. Each small victory, the first controlled movement, the first weight-bearing step, the first coordinated motion, was celebrated by the entire community. The Galactic Council representatives returned periodically, ostensibly to monitor the situation, but really to witness something they couldn't quite understand. The binary's probability calculations grew increasingly erratic as success rates defied their models. The void touched, observed in silence, absorbing data that didn't fit their worldview. Even Administrator Thexnil's crystalline form showed hints of uncertainty, their absolute confidence in technological hierarchies beginning to crack. But it was the phantasm who made the most telling observation, drifting through the workshop one evening as Sarah helped Kixla practice weight transfers. "We have been fools," they said, their voice carrying the weight of revelation. "We measure advancement by the complexity of technology, by the elegance of solutions. But humans measure it by the problems solved, by the lives changed. Perhaps that is the more accurate metric." Sarah didn't respond. She was too focused on Kixla's movements. The child was making remarkable progress, her determination driving the learning algorithm to adapt faster than any simulation had predicted. But she heard the words, "File them away with all the other small victories." Because in the end, that's what this was about. Not proving human technology superior, it wasn't. Not challenging galactic authority, though that had been satisfying. It was about a 7-year-old girl who had lost her leg, her home, and her parents, but refused to lose hope. And if human technology could give her back even one of those things, then every sleepless night, every failed prototype, every confrontation with skeptics had been worth it. Hashtag Part 3. The morning of day 47 began like any other in the refugee camp. Mercury rain had given way to the planet's brief dry season, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with residual toxins. Sarah was already in the workshop when the emergency sirens began their piercing wail, a sound that turned every refugee's blood cold, regardless of species. "Seismic event incoming," the automated warning system announced in multiple languages. "Magnitude 7.2. Estimated arrival for minutes. All personnel to emergency shelters immediately." Kepler 442b was tectonically unstable, one of the reasons it served as only a temporary refugee holding point. The planet's crust shifted and groaned regularly, but a 7.2 was serious. Sarah's mind immediately went to the workshop's equipment, but more importantly to Kixla. Rixma's panicked clicks filled the air as she burst into the workshop. She went to the supply depot with the morning volunteers. "That's in Sector 7, the unstable zone." Sarah's blood ran cold. Sector 7 had the weakest structural reinforcements in the camp. They'd been meaning to upgrade it, but resources were limited and other areas had taken priority. In a major seismic event, "How's her mobility with the prosthetic?" Sarah asked, already grabbing her emergency kit. "She's been walking for 2 weeks, but running is still." Rixma's shell flashed desperate purples and reds. "She can't move fast enough. Not to get clear in 4 minutes. 3 minutes now." The ground was already beginning to vibrate, a low rumble that seemed to come from the planet's core. Around them, beings of a dozen species fled toward the reinforced emergency shelters, their various forms of locomotion creating a chaotic dance of survival. Sarah made a decision that went against every safety protocol she'd been trained to follow. "I'm going after her." "That's suicide," Yixna protested, her forearms gesturing frantically. "Human bodies can't withstand. Watch me," Sarah interrupted, then sprinted from the workshop. The refugee camp stretched for kilometers, a maze of temporary structures and supply routes. Sarah's enhanced suit provided some protection, and augmented her speed, but she was still painfully, dangerously human. As she ran, the ground's vibration intensified. Small objects began to dance and fall. In the distance, she could see the first structural failures beginning, support beams bending, walls cracking. 2 minutes. Sector 7 was chaos. The supply depot, a massive structure that housed food, medical supplies, and equipment, was already showing stress fractures. Volunteers of various species fled in panic, their evacuation training forgotten in the face of primal fear. Sarah scanned desperately for a small Zealothy form. There, near the medical supply section, Kixlaw was trying to help evacuate younger refugees, her prosthetic leg moving in jerky, determined motions. The device was performing admirably under stress, but it simply wasn't fast enough. Not for this. Kixlaw! Sarah shouted over the growing roar. The child turned, her compound eyes widening. Sarah! The little ones, they're scared. Emergency protocols now. Sarah reached them in seconds, her trained eye assessing the situation. 3 young Zealothy, barely more than hatchlings, huddled in terror. 1 young Vrex, a silicon-based species, who had crystallized in fear, becoming immobile. We need to move. All of you. 1 minute. The ground lurched. Not the gradual buildup of a normal quake, but a sudden, violent shift that sent everyone sprawling. Sarah heard the ominous groan of overstressed metal above them. The depot's superstructure was failing. The building's coming down, she said with a calmness she didn't feel. Kixlaw, can your prosthetic handle carrying extra weight? The child's shell flashed through fear to determination. I'll make it handle it. Good girl. Sarah scooped up 2 of the hatchlings while Kixlaw grabbed the 3rd. The Vrex youngling remained crystallized, a defense mechanism that made them nearly indestructible, but also immobile. Sarah made another split-second decision. Hold on tight, she told the hatchlings, then bent and lifted the Vrex child. The weight was staggering. Silicon-based beings were dense, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. 30 seconds. They ran. Or rather, Sarah staggered forward under the weight while Kixlaw moved in her lurching, but determined gait. The prosthetic servos whined under the extra strain, but the learning algorithm was adapting in real time, optimizing power distribution for the emergency. The exit was 20 meters away. 10, 5. The ceiling began its collapse with a sound like thunder. Metal beams twisted and fell like deadly rain. Sarah saw their death coming, a massive support strut plummeting directly toward them. No time to dodge. No time to do anything, but Kixlaw moved. Not the jerky, still learning movement of the past weeks, but a fluid leap that should have been impossible for someone still adapting to a prosthetic. She shoved Sarah and the younglings aside with strength born of desperation, her mechanical leg pivoting with perfect precision. The beam missed them by centimeters, crashing into the floor with enough force to punch through to the substrate below. But Kixlaw's heroic move had thrown off her balance. She tumbled, the prosthetic leg catching on debris, its actuators screaming in protest. 0 seconds. The world exploded into chaos. The ground didn't just shake, it rippled like water, then cracked like ice. The depot completed its collapse in a cacophony of destruction. Sarah threw her body over the younglings, trusting her suit to protect them all from the worst of the debris. Time stretched. Each second felt like hours as the planet vented its geological fury. Sarah could hear nothing over the roar, see nothing through the dust and destruction. She held tight to the children, feeling them tremble against her, and prayed to whatever forces governed the universe that Kixlaw was safe. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The violent shaking subsided to tremors, then stillness. Sarah's ears rang in the sudden silence. Slowly, carefully, she pushed aside the debris covering them. Her suit had held. The warning indicators flashed across her vision. The younglings were scared but unharmed, even the Vrex child beginning to decrystallize as the danger passed. Kixlaw, Sarah called out, her voice hoarse. Kixlaw. Here, came a weak response. I am stuck. Sarah found her 10 meters away, trapped under a section of collapsed wall. The prosthetic leg was visible, twisted at an angle that made Sarah's heart sink. But Kixlaw was alive, conscious, and when Sarah managed to lift the debris, Another feat of adrenaline-fueled strength, relatively uninjured. My leg, Kixlaw said quietly, looking at the mangled prosthetic. It's broken. We'll build another, Sarah assured her, checking for injuries. We'll build a dozen if we need to. Are you hurt? Your biological legs. No, Kixlaw paused, her shell shifting through colors Sarah had never seen before. Sarah, I jumped. I actually jumped. For a moment, it felt like I had my real leg back. Before Sarah could respond, rescue teams arrived. The camp's emergency response was well-practiced, and soon the area swarmed with medical personnel and evacuation specialists. Sarah found herself separated from Kixlaw as they were both taken for medical evaluation. The next hours passed in a blur. The earthquake's damage was extensive, but not catastrophic. The camp's designers had built with the planet's instability in mind. Casualties were mercifully light, though injuries were numerous. Sarah's own examination revealed severe strain injuries and a collection of bruises that would have her moving carefully for days. But her mind wasn't on her own condition. As soon as she was released, she headed for the medical center where Kixlaw was being treated. She found a crowd already gathered, not just medical staff, but engineers, camp administrators, and even some of the council representatives. 17 lives, Vexaw was saying as Sarah approached. The security footage is clear. You're human, and young Kixlaw saved 17 lives in Sector 7, including their own. The prosthetic performed beyond all projections, Yixna added, studying a data pad. The learning algorithm adapted to emergency conditions in ways we didn't think possible. For those critical moments, it wasn't just functional, it was extraordinary. Administrator Thexnil stood apart from the others, their crystalline form cycling through colors of what Sarah was beginning to recognize as deep thought. The other council representatives flanked them, equally contemplative. Where is she? Sarah asked, interrupting the technical discussion. Treatment room 3, a medical technician answered. The prosthetic is damaged beyond repair, but she has no serious injuries. Remarkable considering. Sarah didn't wait for the rest. She found Kixlaw sitting up in bed, the destroyed prosthetic laid out on a nearby table. Rixma sat beside her, holding one of the child's hands in her own. Hey, hero, Sarah said softly from the doorway. Kixlaw's shell immediately flushed blue, that beautiful color of hope mixed now with something else. Pride, Sarah realized. For the first time since losing her leg, Kixlaw looked proud. I saved them, the child said wonderingly. Even with a mechanical leg, even though I'm still learning, I saved them. You did more than that. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, examining the ruined prosthetic. The core structure had held remarkably well. It was the joints and actuators that had failed under the extreme stress. You proved something important today. Something I've been trying to explain since we started this project. What? That the measure of technology isn't in its sophistication or elegance. It's in what it allows people to do. Today, our primitive human engineering allowed you to be a hero. That prosthetic didn't just replace what you lost. For those crucial moments, it gave you capabilities you never had before. A knock at the door interrupted them. Administrator Thexnil entered, their massive crystalline form barely fitting through the doorway. Behind them, Sarah could see the other council representatives waiting in the corridor. May we come in? Thexnil asked, a courtesy Sarah had never heard from them before. At Kixlaw's nervous nod, they entered, arranging themselves around the small room. The binary's dual consciousness flickered rapidly, processing data. The void touch seemed to absorb the very light around the destroyed prosthetic. The phantasm drifted near the window, partially phased as always. We have been reviewing the incident, Thexnil began, their harmonics unusually subdued. The footage, the data from the prosthetic's final moments, the testimony of those saved. They paused, a behavior Sarah had never seen from the usually decisive administrator. We were wrong. The words hung in the air like suspended gravity. In the Galactic Council's long history, admissions of error were rare enough to be legendary. Human technology, Thexnil continued, is indeed primitive by our standards. It lacks the elegance of quantum processing, the efficiency of bioorganic systems, the permanence of crystalline matrices. But what we fail to consider is that sometimes elegance is not the highest virtue. The binary spoke up, both aspects in perfect sync. Analysis of the prosthetic's performance indicates multiple system failures that should have resulted in complete shutdown. Instead, the device continued functioning through what can only be described as creative interpretation of its own parameters. The learning algorithm didn't just adapt, it evolved in real time beyond its programming. That's impossible, the Void Touched interjected, though their tone suggested wonder rather than denial. Machines cannot exceed their programming. Human machines can, Sarah said quietly, because we build them to be like us, stubborn, adaptable, and unwilling to accept limitations. We don't program them to be perfect. We program them to try. The phantasm drifted closer to Kixlaw, their partially phased form shimmering. You pushed your companion aside. The mechanical leg responded faster than biological limbs could have. How? Kixlaw's antennae twitched, the zealothy equivalent of a shrug. I didn't think about it. I just needed to save them. And my leg understood. Your leg understood, Fex Nil repeated slowly. A mass of metal and circuits understood the need to save lives. They turned to Sarah. How many more of these devices could you build? Sarah blinked at the sudden shift. With the right resources? Dozens. Hundreds. But each one needs to be customized, trained to the individual user. It's not mass production, it's craftsmanship. And if you had access to better materials, galactic standard components to integrate with your unique approach. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're talking about hybrid technology, combining human and galactic engineering. I'm talking about, Fex Nil said carefully, acknowledging that perhaps the galaxy has been too quick to dismiss human innovation. Your species' technology may be primitive, but your approach, this willingness to try anything, to merge incompatible systems, to build machines that learn and adapt, this has value. Over the next several days, the workshop transformed from a refugee camp curiosity to something approaching an official facility. Resources that had been carefully hoarded were suddenly made available. Galactic engineers who had previously shown only skepticism now came offering collaboration. Sarah worked with her team to design not just a replacement for Kixlaw's destroyed prosthetic, but an improved version. They incorporated zealothy biofeedback systems with human mechanical engineering. Galactic nanomaterials provided durability, while human design philosophy ensured adaptability. The learning algorithm was enhanced with quantum processing elements that allowed it to evolve even faster. But perhaps the most significant change was in the camp itself. Word of the rescue had spread beyond the refugees to the wider galactic community. News feeds that usually ignored the primitive humans suddenly focused on the story of a human engineer and a zealothy child who had saved lives with obsolete technology. Other species began arriving at the workshop, not just refugees but established citizens of the galaxy. A Korvac whose crystalline singing appendage had been shattered in an industrial accident, told by doctors that only expensive bioreconstruction could help. A binary whose secondary consciousness had been damaged, leaving them half-functional and desperate. A young Vrex who had never been able to move properly due to a congenital defect in their silicon structure. Each case was different. Each required innovation, adaptation, the merging of technologies and ideas that the galaxy had kept separate for millennia. And each success, the Korvac singing again through a hybrid vocal processor, the binary reconnecting through human neural net algorithms, the Vrex taking their first unburdened steps, added to the growing recognition that human technology offered something unique. We're not replacing galactic technology, Sarah explained to a gathering of engineers from a dozen species. We're filling the gaps, providing alternatives for those who can't access or afford the standard solutions. Sometimes simple and adaptable is exactly what's needed. 6 weeks after the earthquake, Kixlaw stood in the workshop wearing her new prosthetic. Version 2.0, the team called it, though Sarah preferred to think of it as Evolution 1. The device was sleeker than the original, integrating gracefully with the child's natural form. But more than its appearance, its performance was remarkable. Ready? Sarah asked. Kixlaw's shell blazed with confidence. Ready. Music filled the workshop, zealothy harmony songs traditionally used for celebrations. Kixlaw began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. The prosthetic responded perfectly to her intentions, learning and adapting with each step. Then she danced. It wasn't the mechanical movement of someone managing with a prosthetic. It was true dance, fluid and graceful, the joy patterns of her people that she'd thought she'd never perform again. The prosthetic didn't just keep up, it enhanced her movement, providing stability and strength that allowed for leaps and spins that pushed the boundaries of traditional form. The workshop erupted in celebration. Engineers wept openly, a surprising sight among species known for emotional control. Sarah found herself surrounded by colleagues of many species, all talking excitedly about the implications, the possibilities, the future. But her eyes stayed on Kixla, dancing with abandon, her shell a brilliant cascade of joyful colors. The child who had been hidden away as broken was now the symbol of something revolutionary. The proof that innovation could come from unexpected sources, that primitive didn't mean inferior, that sometimes the best solution was the one that helped people not just survive, but thrive. Administrator Thexnil approached Sarah during the celebration, their crystalline form showing what she now recognized as approval. The Galactic Council has been discussing your work. There's interest in establishing a formal program, hybrid technology development for medical applications. We would need someone to lead it, someone who understands both the technical and philosophical aspects. Sarah watched Kixla teaching the other young refugees her modified joy pattern, her prosthetic leg indistinguishable in function from her biological ones. She thought about humanity's place in the galaxy, not as students learning to copy their betters, but as contributors bringing their own unique perspective. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "but only if my team comes with me. All of them, human and Zealothy and anyone else who wants to join. This only works because we did it together." "Agreed," Thexnil said immediately. In fact, that collaborative approach is precisely what we hope to replicate. The galaxy has operated too long on the assumption that there is only one path to advancement. Perhaps it's time we learned what humans have always known, that diversity of thought leads to innovation. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah felt a hand slip into hers. She looked down to find Kixla beside her, shell glowing with contentment. "Thank you," the child said simply. "Thank you," Sarah replied, "for reminding me why we do this, for being brave enough to trust primitive human technology, for proving that sometimes the impossible just takes a little longer." Kixla's compound eyes reflected the workshop's lights like tiny galaxies. "Will you build more? For others like me?" "As many as we can," Sarah promised. "And each one will be better than the last. That's what humans do. We learn, we adapt, we improve. And now we'll do it with the whole galaxy watching." The child's shell flashed with that beautiful blue of hope, now mixed with certainty. "Good," she said firmly, "because I want to help. The algorithm learned from me, but I learned too. I understand how humans think now, how you solve problems. I want to be an engineer like you." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. And somewhere in the galaxy, the story spread, of humans who built with metal and determination what others crafted from living tissue and quantum fields, of a child who danced again, of technology that learned and adapted and grew, of proof that sometimes being primitive was just another word for being creative enough to find another way. #part for the Galactic Medical Symposium on Aurelius Prime hadn't seen controversy like this in 3 centuries. The massive amphitheater, carved from a single crystal that resonated with harmonic frequencies, buzzed with tension as delegates from 200 species took their seats. At the center of it all, Sarah Chin stood before a presentation display, feeling impossibly small and impossibly human. 6 months had passed since the earthquake on Kepler, 442b. 6 months since Kixla had danced with her hybrid prosthetic. 6 months that had changed everything. "The human is about to speak," someone whispered in the upper tiers, the words carrying clearly through the acoustic crystal. The tone wasn't entirely dismissive anymore, progress of sort, but skepticism still colored every syllable. Sarah cleared her throat, activating the holographic display. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings of all configurations," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I stand before you not as a representative of human technological superiority, because we possess no such thing. I stand here as proof that sometimes The most profound solutions come from the most unexpected places. The display shifted to show Kixla, now walking with perfect fluidity beside other young Zealothi. The prosthetic was invisible beneath her decorative shell covers, integrated so seamlessly that new observers couldn't identify which leg was mechanical. 8 months ago, this child couldn't walk. Traditional galactic medicine offered no immediate solutions. Bioregeneration would take years and cost more than a refugee family could ever afford. Quantum consciousness transfer doesn't work for limb replacement. Neural bridging requires technologies the refugee camps simply don't possess. Sarah paused, meeting as many gazes as she could across the vast amphitheater. So we built her a new leg using salvaged materials, basic programming, and something the galaxy had forgotten existed: mechanical engineering adapted through machine learning. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembly. In the section reserved for the medical cast of the Aurelius Collective, several beings flashed colors of indignation. They had perfected biomedical technology over millennia. The suggestion that crude human mechanics could offer anything valuable bordered on insult. "Show them the data," Sarah said to her team, seated in the front row. Yixna, now her chief neural interface specialist, activated her portion of the presentation. Zexville brought up the mechanical specifications. And there, sitting between them with her shell glowing with nervous excitement, was Kixla herself. The holographic display exploded into a constellation of data points. Success rates, adaptation curves, cost analyses, patient testimonials from dozens of species. Each point of light represented a life changed, a being who had regained mobility through hybrid technology. In 8 months, Sarah continued, our program has provided functional prosthetics to 347 individuals across 19 species. The average cost per unit is less than 1% of traditional bioregeneration. The average adaptation time is 3 weeks compared to months or years for conventional alternatives. But most importantly, she gestured, and the display shifted to show video testimonials. A Korvac musician playing instruments thought forever beyond their reach. A binary whose damaged consciousness had found new pathways through human-designed neural networks. An elderly phantasm who could finally interact with solid objects through specially designed haptic feedback systems. Most importantly, Sarah repeated, we've given people their lives back. This is preposterous. The objection came from Dr. Helixian, head of the Aurelius medical cast. The crystalline being rose from their seat, their form refracting light in patterns of outrage. You present crude mechanical solutions as if they were medical breakthroughs. These are temporary measures at best, dangerous shortcuts at worst. The galaxy has standards for a reason. What standards helped Kixla? Sarah asked quietly, but the acoustics carried her words to every corner. What standards gave hope to the thousands still waiting in refugee camps across the border worlds? What standards address the needs of those who can't afford perfection? Perfection is not a luxury, Dr. Helixian countered. It is the minimum acceptable outcome in medical intervention. Your devices may function, but they lack the elegance of true medical science. They are engineering solutions to biological problems, a fundamental category error that civilized species abandoned millennia ago. Sarah felt her team tense behind her. This was the heart of the resistance they'd faced, the belief that mechanical solutions were inherently inferior to biological ones, that engineering and medicine were separate disciplines that should never merge. May I? A small voice asked from the front row. Kixla stood, her shell showing the deep purple of determination mixed with streaks of nervous orange. May I address the assembly? Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. Patients didn't typically speak at medical symposiums. But the moderator, an ancient void-touched whose neutrality was legendary, gestured approval. Kixla walked to the center of the floor, her gait perfect and natural. She stopped beside Sarah, then slowly, deliberately, removed the decorative covers from her prosthetic leg. The hybrid device gleamed under the lights, clearly mechanical, clearly artificial, clearly alive with purpose. I'm not a doctor, Kixla began, her young voice carrying surprising strength. I'm not an engineer. I'm a child who lost her leg, her home, and her parents in the span of one terrible day. The galaxy's perfect solutions were beyond my reach, too expensive, too complex, too far in a future I might not survive to see. She paused, her compound eyes scanning the assembly. This leg is not elegant by your standards. It is metal and circuits where you would prefer living tissue. It learns through algorithms instead of biological integration. But this morning I ran with my pod siblings. Yesterday, I climbed the memorial tree we planted for those lost in the evacuation. Tomorrow, I will dance at my friend's naming ceremony. The amphitheater had gone completely silent. Even Dr. Helixian's form had stilled, their crystalline structure no longer refracting indignation. You speak of perfection, Kixlaw continued, but perfection that cannot be accessed is worthless. You speak of standards, but standards that exclude the desperate serve only those already served. My leg is not perfect, but it is mine, and it works, and it gave me back my life. How is that not medicine? A sound began in the upper tiers, a rhythmic clicking. Zealothy delegates, expressing approval in their traditional manner. It spread, joined by the harmonic hums of the resonance, the color flashes of the spectrum dancers, the phase shifts of the quantum touched. Not universal approval, not yet, but acknowledgement. Sarah stepped forward again. We're not asking the galaxy to abandon biomedical science. We're not claiming mechanical solutions are superior. We're simply saying there's room for both. Room for alternatives. Room for those who need help now, not in some perfect future. Mechanical failures, compatibility issues, the lack of self-repair capabilities. All addressed in our protocols. Zexville stood, his scarred shell lending him gravitas. Every prosthetic includes multiple redundancies. Failure rates are actually lower than biological rejection rates for transplants. As for self-repair, no, our devices don't heal themselves. They require maintenance. But that maintenance can be performed by local technicians with basic training, not specialized medical casts in expensive facilities. Show them the map, Sarah said. The holographic display shifted to show the galaxy. Points of light indicating medical facilities capable of advanced bioregeneration. They clustered around the core worlds, growing sparse toward the borders, absent entirely in refugee sectors and developing systems. Then, overlay points appeared, locations where hybrid prosthetic workshops had been established. They spread across the map like stars, reaching into the darkest corners, the forgotten sectors, the places where hope had been a luxury no one could afford. In 8 months, Sarah said, we've established 43 workshops. Each one can produce custom prosthetics for multiple species. Each one is staffed by local engineers and medical technicians trained in our methods. Each one represents dozens, hundreds, eventually thousands of beings who will walk, grasp, see, hear, and live again. But at what quality? Dr. Helixian had found their voice again. You offer function without form, utility without elegance. The galaxy has spent millennia perfecting medical science. Would you have us step backward? I would have you step outward, Sarah replied. Beyond the assumption that there's only one right way to heal. Beyond the belief that primitive automatically means inferior. Beyond the walls that keep perfection in and desperation out. Another figure rose from the audience, Administrator Thexnil. Their presence at the symposium had been noted, but not explained. Now, their crystalline form commanded attention. The Galactic Council has been monitoring the hybrid prosthetic program, they announced. Not just its successes, but its implications. For too long, we have measured advancement by the height of our achievements, forgetting to notice who gets left behind in the climb. The human approach, this mixing of mechanical and biological, this emphasis on accessibility over perfection, challenges fundamental assumptions about progress. They paused, their forms cycling through colors of contemplation. But perhaps it's time those assumptions were challenged. The Council moves to recognize hybrid prosthetics as a legitimate medical intervention, pending establishment of appropriate safety protocols and training standards. The amphitheater erupted. Delegates stood, sat, flashed, hummed, clicked, and phase-shifted in a cacophony of reaction. Some stormed out in protest. Others pressed forward with questions. The medical establishment of the galaxy had just cracked, and through that crack, something new was growing. In the chaos, Sarah felt a hand slip into hers. Kixlaw stood beside her, shell glowing with pride. Did we do it? The child asked. We started it, Sarah corrected. The real work comes now. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Committees formed to establish standards for hybrid technology. Traditional medical castes demanded seats at the table, insisting on oversight. Engineers from species who had never considered medical applications came forward with innovations. The fusion of disciplines that the galaxy had kept separate for millennia began in earnest. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, translating between worldviews, mediating between those who saw only crude mechanics and those who recognized adaptive innovation. Her workshop on Kepler 442b became a pilgrimage site for engineers and doctors alike, all coming to see where the revolution had begun. But the real victory came in smaller moments. A message from a Vrex colony where 17 beings had received prosthetics in a single month. Video of a young phantasm using a hybrid haptic system to paint for the first time. A delegation from species Sarah had never heard of, traveling from the galaxy's edge to learn the techniques. You've changed everything, Yixna told her one evening as they worked on a new neural interface design. The Zealoty engineer had become invaluable, her ability to bridge biological and digital systems unmatched. The galaxy will never be the same. The galaxy was already changing, Sarah replied, fine-tuning a servo motor. We just gave it a push in a new direction. Humans are good at that, seeing possibilities where others see limitations. Is that why your species survived? Zexville asked from across the workshop. You had no natural advantages, no biological gifts. By all logic, you should have gone extinct long ago. Sarah smiled, thinking of humanity's long, improbable journey from African savannas to alien worlds. We survive because we're too stubborn to accept impossibility. Because when evolution didn't give us wings, we built them. When biology didn't give us strength, we made tools. When a universe told us we couldn't survive in space, we wrapped ourselves in metal and faith and went anyway. And when a child couldn't walk, Kixla added from her workstation where she was learning to calibrate neural interfaces, you built her a new leg. We built her a new leg, Sarah agreed. And in doing so, we accidentally started a revolution. The revolution spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within a year, hybrid technology workshops operated on over 300 worlds. The waiting list that had once stretched decades shortened to weeks. Beings who had accepted disability as permanent found new possibilities. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The rigid categories that had defined galactic civilization, biological versus mechanical, medical versus engineering, perfect versus functional, began to blur. Young beings from traditional medical castes studied human engineering principles. Engineers discovered the complexity of biological systems. Innovation flourished in the spaces between disciplines. We have a problem, Administrator Thexnell announced during one of their regular visits to the original workshop. But their crystalline form showed amusement rather than concern. The Galactic Medical Symposium has received a formal petition. Several thousand beings are demanding that hybrid technology be recognized not as an alternative to traditional medicine, but as a new discipline entirely.